Hey, everybody, welcome to the program. It's good to have Senator Scott Herndon with us today from District 1. And Scott is one of the all-stars on the Freedom Index. A plus is all around on education, freedom, and spending. What an amazing run. And it's just your first legislative session. You're just getting started. How was it for you?
Well, I actually did enjoy the work. And as far as the ratings on the indexes, basically what I did was I would look at the bill, I would figure out if I like it according to certain principles that I held, and then I would vote that way. So I was strictly voting on the contents of the bill, and it turned out that those principles aligned with what the Freedom Index and the Spending Index and the Education Index rates. So we were just happened to be in ideological alignment.
Yep, that's exactly what it's supposed to do. I mean, you're looking for now. There are folks that will look at the Freedom Index every day and see if it aligns with them or not, and ask us questions. But it's great to have folks that just have that in their core. They just understand how this is supposed to work. In terms of what it really means to be a conservative. So, good on you for doing that. But for some reason, as I look around, you score in the 40s on IACI's index, and also about the same score for the Association of Idaho Cities. I'm sure there are other groups out there that have ratings, but those are the two that I saw this week, and I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. Why is that, do you suppose?
Well, there was an inverse relationship between those who scored highest on the IFF ratings and those who scored lowest on the IACI ratings. In other words, so if you were high on IFF, you were low on IACI. Well, look, all you got to do is look at some of the bills that they rated. So they loved the Idaho Launch Program, the governor's corporate welfare program, and his cronyism benefits. And we didn't like that. That's a new governmental program that operates outside of our constitutional mandate. And if you didn't like the $10,000 student loan forgiveness that Joe Biden wanted to give to college students, then I don't see how you could like the IACI launch program that Governor Brad Little wanted. And so, of course, we opposed H-24, and so we scored low. They also wanted amnesty for illegal immigrants so that they can work in corporate jobs and farming around the state of Idaho. And Republicans, conservative Republicans, don't want to give amnesty to illegal immigrants. We want people to come here to the United States legally. But IACI scored that bill highly. And of course, those who care about the Constitution of the United States voted against that bill. And so we scored low on the IACI score. And as far as the Association of Idaho Cities, cities or municipal corporations, they have their corporate interests in what they want. It tends to align more with what I would call socialist welfare, and anybody who represents the people and individuals and is a good fiduciary of taxpayer dollars, they're not going to score very well on the Association of Idaho Cities Index. So that's basically what happened on those indexes. So I think if you want to represent the people's constitutional interests, you're probably never going to score highly on those corporate welfare programs.
Even though you're obviously conservative, I'm sure there are some bills that you voted for or against that were really hard or harder maybe to explain to constituents. What's one of those that you go back and well, gosh, I can't believe you voted this way or that way, and you had to actually explain it to people?
One example, we killed a bill in the Idaho Senate that was going to be a porn filter. It was a requirement of manufacturers. So if I have my iPhone manufactured by Apple, if you have your Samsung Galaxy phone, the bill was Kevin Cook's idea, and he wanted to basically require the manufacturers to be responsible that when these devices are activated in the state of Idaho, that they come with it and activated by a minor, someone under the age of 18, that they come with an automatic porn filter turned on. And I voted against that. And then you do have to explain that to voters, because on the flip side, I voted for House Bill 314, which would ban porn in public libraries from being accessible to minors. And so some voters would say, well, why one and not the other? And the answer is very simple. The bill that was related to the phones is basically like asking General Motors or Ford to monitor the content coming in on a car radio. And that's not really something that they should be responsible for. That's governmental overreach into private companies in a way that's not even going to achieve the purpose. And that's the real key. It's not even going to achieve the objective. And it's an undue burden on private companies that won't accomplish the goal. The other one, House Bill 314, those are government-run libraries. And it wasn't a book ban, and it was basically saying that we're not going to give pornography, aggressive sexual material with prurient interest to children under the age of 18. And we are the government. We should regulate governmental libraries. So
paid for by you. Yeah, the difference would be between driving in your car and having the radio on, or getting in the public transit system in Portland and being bombarded by pornographic images and messages. You would say no to the latter because that's being funded by taxpayers as a public entity, but your car is your car, and you should be able to, as an adult, turn the radio and put it on something else.
That's right.
Very, very simple. Yeah. The budget is probably the most interesting thing to me. It's the only thing that you have to do every year. Scoring nearly 100% on the spending index is quite an achievement. What does that translate to you? What do you tell voters that means when you're asked about it, or if you see them, or you talk about your work on JFAC?
Well, number one, this actually speaks well to some of the folks that do actually create that spending index, because I believe this was the first year that you guys rated every single bill, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, we changed the index. We said we're going to do every single budget bill, and we're going to rate it in the severity of the goodness or badness of a budget, and often very bad, which is, before we just said, is it sincerely objectionable, +1 or -1. So yeah, this was and you can't avoid voting on budget bills, whereas you could not vote on a policy bill. Budget bills have to pass.
Well, half of the bills that we do in the Senate are budget bills, and the metrics on the spending index are very simple. Are we growing government more than the rise of inflation and the growth of the state of Idaho? The number of people coming in, the number of people that are demanding legitimate services. And those are a couple of the points on it, right? So since we do have people that are giving an honest analysis of these budget bills, and that's the hard part. I'm on JFAC, Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee. There's a history that goes into these budgets. You can look back 2, 3, 4, 5 years, 10 years, and see what the direction of these budgets are going. And right now, they are growing way faster than the rate of inflation and the growth of the state on most of the bills. Are we adding more people that you're never going to get rid of again? So when you add functions to government, they never go away unless you write in a sunset clause and get to revisit it in the future. I haven't personally seen a bill come along that says, let's get rid of something that the government is doing. Although next year, I plan to write a couple of those bills. So the good news is that with the Idaho Freedom Foundation, we have people that are looking at that history, because as a new legislator especially, you don't have all that history. Although next year, I'll have that background knowledge from having gone through it this year, and we'll accumulate that knowledge over time. But the spending index is very simple. Are we growing government beyond the rate of inflation and the growth of the state? If we are, that needs to be seriously questioned. And in most cases, you're going to want to vote against those bills. We really need to constrain the rate of the growth of government, because it's redistributing the wealth from the taxpayer to do something that government usually does inefficiently.
Very nice. Well, you did a really good job, and it was pretty amazing. The other thing I thought was kind of interesting is you may not be aware of this, but if you go back, and I did this research, if you go back, you look at 20 years of votes in the Senate, there's about 350 roll call votes, give or take, every single year. And most of those votes are unanimous, both procedural and votes on bills. About 2/3 of those unanimous, and you see that unanimous consent that the roll call used for the previous bill now be used for this bill to pass 35-0, and this year about 25%. And I remember towards the end of the legislative session where the Lieutenant Governor Scott Bedke, you had a 35-0 vote on something, and he said, well, there's that elusive 35-0 vote. You have 35 senators. I don't think you should be unanimous on 2/3 of the actions taking place on the floor. Otherwise, you got a real problem. And it's pretty impressive to see free thinkers like yourself, and at least about 9 or 10 of your colleagues, sometimes 12 on a good day, view this a little bit differently, view this exercise in the fight for liberty every single day, every single floor vote, every single action that you take in committees and onward. Pretty impressive stuff. So my hat's off to you.
Well, we
Closing.
certainly, what we don't want to do is we don't want to rubber stamp everything that the governor wants and everything that the administrative agencies want. That's not our job there. You've got 35 people in that body. You should be independent thinkers. I would think that all those different perspectives should generate debate. And of course, there should be some dissent. And that's what I would expect to see. And you actually saw that bills that even were close to being, overwhelmingly in favor of, there would still be 2 or 3 people, usually among the conservatives, that would have some objection for one reason or another. So that 35-0 was very elusive this session, and properly so.
What do you think the takeaway is for some of the colleagues that are on the other side? What kind of feedback did you get from the folks that maybe they're perhaps Republicans and maybe they consider themselves conservative? They don't score very high on the freedom index or the spending index. Did you have conversations with them? Did it look like they understood what it is you're trying to achieve and why you're voting the way you're voting?
Well, I think they definitely got used to it. And I'll use a good example as Abby Lee, the assistant majority leader. I think in previous years, of course, she's really expecting those unanimous consent votes where we can just roll the vote from one bill to another. And she certainly figured out right away that that's not going to happen very much. So she never really stood up and asked for it unless she was pretty confident. I remember one time she did stand up and ask for it. And we weren't really expecting that. It's probably not a bill you would have expected would be unanimous. And I actually had to say objection because normally she's looking and we're shaking our heads and she's doing a pretty good read of the room. I think they figured out where we stand on a lot of things. They were very respectful. I will say that leadership, the pro tem, the majority leader, the assistant majority leader, the caucus leader realized that they have at least 10 conservatives in the room, and they were very respectful. I think we got a fair hearing for our ideas, and we weren't disrespected for our positions. And I think we were able to pull on a few of the conservative bones of the other members of the Republican caucus. So if in previous years they kind of leaned to the left a little bit, you get some conservatives in that body and you can pull them a little bit back to the right. And I think we saw that on a few of the votes this year.
Do you think that'll happen more next year, or do you think it'll take another election cycle before you get more of a conservative streak going in the state Senate?
To make real change, I think people have to show up there with the principles already built in. I say this isn't the Boy Scouts, and we're not passing resolutions. We're voting on things like, are we going to use the firing squad for the death penalty? Are we going to make genital mutilation a new 10-year felony, where when we vote for that, the sheriff and the police departments are going to come and arrest you, the prosecutor is going to prosecute you, a judge is going to throw the book at you, and IDOC is going to house you for 10 years. These are serious issues. And I think you've got to show up with your principles baked in. If the principles are not there and they're not part of who you are, then that's not going to come out when you're sitting on the floor and you're in committee and you're doing debates and you're making votes. So I think the reality is, in order to have a real conservative Senate and really start to kill the things that need to be killed and need to pass bills that should pass, we're going to have to get a few more conservative members added to that body. And so I think we're going to have to be looking at those future election cycles.
I think that the founders of our country understood that you could have, I don't know, a complete moron be president of the United States and a bunch of backbenchers serving in Congress. You depend on the individual states to not be socialist, to not be woke, awful places to live, and where your kids are subjected to, critical race theory and gender theory and all this other stuff. You have to have one state that pushes back. And right now, all 50 states are treading water, including ours. We're not California, but we're certainly not devoid of socialist and woke kinds of ideologies in our government-run institutions. So pushing back is how you save the country, in my view. And I believe you agree on that too.
Well, sure. The people have the sovereignty. They've granted that sovereignty to their state. The design of the system is the states are supposed to exercise that sovereignty. We're not supposed to be a mere policy implementation center of the federal government. But certainly you've seen a lot of states just act in that role, especially during COVID. You saw them pass along federal governmental policies, take all the money, implement all the programs with all the strings attached. That's not what we're supposed to do. The design of this republic is Idaho should be very different than California or Arkansas. and they should reflect the people and their constitutional principles and their culture. And I hope that that's what we're going to see in the future. That's what, and then if someone doesn't like Idaho and they don't like the culture of Idaho, they can move somewhere else that meets their cultural demands. And that's what I hope to see in the future. And to get there, we're going to have people that really understand the design of the American Republic. Benjamin Franklin said it's a republic if you can keep it, but you got to understand what kind of republic it is first. It's not the Democratic Republic of North Korea, what we are. So you have to understand what kind of republic America is.
You have to understand it, and people are taught in public schools that we're a democracy, and so it makes it very hard. We're starting from a very, very poor position, if you will, in American history. But great work this session. Great to have you as an ally. Love your voting record and your deep thinking on budget and policy matters. Excellent. Well done, sir. Well done.
Well, thanks. And I appreciate the work of some of the analysts at IFF. I'm sure we'll continue into the future and make some good progress between IFF and some of our conservative legislators. We're going to look for some wins next year. I can tell you that. We'll come ready. We'll plan in the interim, and I expect we'll see some success.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. Thanks for being with us this morning. We'll talk to you again very, very soon.
Sounds great, Wayne.